Ladies and gentlemen, after further review, the Bears still suck. Hit it.
This is Pulse of the Pack.
There's Bledsoe. Down he goes. And there's Reggie White. And that's that hump move. Reggie's coming again. That's Reggie White. Reggie White's going to take over this game right now.
Begins the count. Takes the snap. He has the quarterback. He's into the touchdown. The Packers are out in front. 20-17. And 13 seconds showing on the clock. And the Green Bay Packers are going to be world champions, NFL champions for the third straight year.
Barr lays it up for Freeman, and it's incomplete. Edward, did he make the catch at the 15? What are they going to rule it? He caught it? Touchdown! He did what?
Friends and family, welcome. It's Bear Week. It's Rivalry Week. It's a beautiful thing. It's the weekend after Thanksgiving. I hope you had a very happy and safe holiday weekend in your house with your families if you chose to do so, everything like that. I'm your host today. I am the one and only Jacob Westendorf, and I am joined by the gray Jason Perrone, a little more gray hair after last week's debacle. I don't know what it is about that freaking building, but no lead is safe in that shit box, and it doesn't seem to matter what's going on, but we are moving on. It is no longer Colts week. It is now Bears week, and the Packers are taking on Chicago with a chance to get to 8-3. If the season ended today, and it doesn't, but if it did, if the season ended today, they would be the 2 seed in the NFC, which certainly can't be a negative thing if you're looking at things like that. But all that remains to be kind of seen as to how that all is going to work out, because with this Steelers and Ravens thing, the NFL has talked about the contingency of putting in an 8th playoff team, everything like that. Shout out to our guy, Joe Eric Arrigo in the chat here. Love you too, buddy. Thanks for stopping by. A lot of different things are going to happen. So it's fun to look at everything like that. Oh my. I have an opinion on plenty of things, sir.
Man, you must, hobbyists, just stick around. There's plenty of opinions on this show.
Yeah, I would love to know what exactly I don't have an opinion on, or when I act pretentious and mock those who do have an opinion. But
I think if you want to see some really good mockery, Jake does an awesome job when I'm being a moron in the Slack chat on game day.
Yeah,
that's warranted though.
But welcome to the show. I'm an equal opportunist. If you want to mock me, I'm more than welcome to do that too. Patricia would be okay. I think you're doing that sarcasm thing. So
I love our crowd.
Kudos.
I love our crowd.
I got a legit LOL. I didn't spit out my water, thankfully. I haven't been able to do that. But guys, it's Bears week. Let's jump into a little bit of the news here. The first bit of news, the Bears, their quarterback quandary. Mitchell Trubisky is starting tomorrow against the Packers. Nick Foles out with an injury. Trubisky back in the game. And a little bit more news that we'll get to here in a little bit. Eddie Jackson was activated. He was originally on the reserve COVID list. Akeem Hicks was questionable with an injury of his own. So we'll see if he plays. That, I think, is a sneaky big injury just because that the Bears, and we'll talk about paths to victory here as to how everything goes. But let's start with the quarterback situation. Green Bay has everything in front of them as far as, their own destiny and everything like that. But Green Bay has Trubisky now instead of Foles, Foles was a statue. Trubisky can move a little bit. And I said this on Wednesday's Pack-A-Day show. I think that Trubisky actually gives the Packers a little bit more of a problem to deal with. And I know eventually we're kind of talking about putting lipstick on a pig when it comes to the Bears quarterback situation, but you have to find ways there is a way for Chicago to win this game. And Trubisky hasn't played for a while. The Bears were undefeated when he was in the lineup. Now, win's not a quarterback stat, but he was undefeated. They were undefeated when he was the starting quarterback. And obviously that's changed. They're riding a 4-game losing streak. This wasn't exactly their decision that they made, but overall, I think Trubisky, just because of his mobility, gives them a little bit more of a fit because the Bears' offensive line is in shambles. Charles Leno may or may not be able to go tomorrow. If he can't go, Jason Spriggs, old friend Jason Spriggs, is going to be their left tackle. They have an offensive lineman whose last name is Coward. And I'm not making fun of the guy, but that's a really unfortunate name to have if you're going to be an offensive lineman, especially.
Or because he shares it or sounds much like someone else that works for one of the networks that we're not huge fans of either.
Yeah, there's that too. But overall, I mean, the only thing about Trubisky that gives me some pause is just if Foles is there and the Packers pass rush has ramped up a little bit the last couple of weeks. Rashawn Gary has 11 pressures in the last 2 games. Darius Smith's obviously played better. Preston Smith, we'll leave that out. We want to be positive today. So we're going to leave Preston Smith out of
Well, there is
here.
a positive to be said about that. We'll talk about that later.
Yeah, a little bit. But overall, I think that Green Bay has a better opportunity to get to the quarterback if it's Nick Foles, who moves like a mummy, as opposed to Mitchell Trubisky, who he can move a little bit and he can give the Packers some problems. Overall, like I said, and I've said that way too many times, so I'm going to stop using the word overall. I apologize. Lipstick on a pig. That's ultimately what this quarterback situation is. Jason, what are your thoughts, though? Do you think that Trubisky, for this weekend specifically, gives the Bears a better chance to win the game?
Well, the dynamic of him running is, like you said, is going to help the Bears offense, but the Bears offense needs a lot more help than that. And Draft asks a question, is Trubisky's shoulder still injured? I'm going to say it's still going to, I'm sure it's still sore. It's going to affect him some, but he's playing. So he's not obviously not able to go, but the Bears offense is the biggest problem. I mean, the Packers defense needs a get right game. I think this is a good opportunity for them to do that. I can only pray that the defense, whether it's Mike Pettin or the players or the positional coaches or whoever it is, decide that they're going to take a slightly different approach this week than they did at times last week. They gave up a lot of points, but the Colts are a much better team. I just think the Bears offense is not playing well, and Trubisky hasn't played in a while. He lost his starting job, so has that gotten into his head? I don't think you're going to see, and even peak Mitch Trubisky wasn't as scary. I don't think you're going to see anything close to that version. I mean, the Packers defense just needs to kind of be there. And speaking of that pass rush, the thing I was saying that is kind of a positive that has come out of Preston Smith not playing well, which is not good, is that we know that Rashawn Gary is good at football. And Rashawn Gary is good at moving people against their will. And there was a big contingency of fans that didn't like the pick and thought that, now I've learned that Packers fans are very critical of early Packers picks, no matter what the situation is. But Rashawn Gary is starting to show starting to pay some dividends. And Joe Arrigo makes a really good comment, or a good point here about Gary needs to play more over Preston Smith. I'm firmly in that camp, and I think you're starting to see the snap count move in that direction. So I say all of that to kind of say, yeah, I think the Packers defense has an opportunity to make Mitch Trubisky playing a non-factor for the Bears offense. I just think they're going to be up against it.
And if you want to go with everything here a little bit, just here's the last. This is from Matt Schneidman, and this is per Pro Football Focus. Preston Smith on the season, 230 pass rush snaps, 15 pressures, 2 sacks. Rashawn Gary, 171 pass rush snaps, 22 pressures, 3 sacks, 11 pressures in just the last 2 weeks. So Rashawn Gary has almost equaled Preston Smith's output in just the last 2 games as far as pressures go.
Yep.
I understand at the beginning of the season why you wanted to maybe get your guy, your big money rusher. He was one of your studs last year. Say it's a small sample size. It's going to take him a little bit to get ramped up and get going. But now it's week 12, week 13, something like what the Packers are 7-3 and they've had their bye. So it's week 12. 12 weeks into the season, we're going into December now. There's not time to be wasting on trying to get Preston Smith ramped up. Now, one of the questions and points that Mark Eckel, I believe it was, brought up with Packer Report was that, if you put him on the bench, does he sit there and sulk, or does that kind of inspire him to play better? Is it a wake-up call of, oh, okay, so this kid's taking my spot now. I need to play better and get on that side of things. So that's a good question to have too, and I understand it because Preston Smith's going to play. He's still one of the better edge rushers on this team.
Yeah.
He's not going to, they're not going to bench. They may give Rashawn Gary some of his snaps, but they're not going to give his snaps to Jonathan Garvin and Randy Ramsey and players like that. And they certainly aren't going to do things like that, especially down the stretch here to some raw rookies for a team with Super Bowl aspirations, which they still have. I mean, if you're a playoff team and one of the top seeds in your conference, you have Super Bowl aspirations. So it's a matter of finding those opportunities and getting those players in there. But yeah, I mean, Rashawn Gary is absolutely needing to get on the field more. And he was the 12th overall pick. And last year they essentially redshirted him. And I think you've seen the Packers, and Jacob Morley brought this up last week on the Game On Roundtable, how the Packers are kind of shifting their focus a little bit. Because I've kind of pointed out how under Gutekunst and LaFleur, the Packers, their only day one starter as a rookie ever, granted 2-year sample size, is Darnell Savage. Jair Alexander wasn't a day one starter. He eventually became one very, very quickly. Same with Elton Jenkins. Otherwise, the Packers typically don't play a lot of rookies. And the Steelers are kind of that way too. The Pittsburgh Steelers, unless a player absolutely 100% warrants it right from the jump. Players like TJ Watt and Chase Claypool and players of that nature get on the field very quickly. But overall, and I just did it again, the Packers are starting to shift to where they don't play their rookies as much. So that's something to keep in mind moving forward as the Packers get through things. Something else, a little bit of news I wanted to get to because it was interesting. Just a couple of names, I guess, that people know more than anything else. But the Packers, they were working out Tavon Austin this week. It's unclear if that workout has taken place. Even if it had taken place, it's not something they could finalize and have him ready to play this weekend anyway. So this would be the soonest he could play is next weekend against the Philadelphia Eagles. And then the other one was Kenny Stills. He was a mutual. The Texans and Stills mutually agreed to part ways. So whatever that means to you, I think the question now was, there was some scuttle back and forth yesterday as to whether or not he was subject to waivers. He is, because every veteran after the trade deadline is subject to waivers. It's kind of like that do not drop rule in fantasy. So if somebody in my league decides they don't want somebody to win the league, they're just going to drop this dude. And hey, I'm going to send you a text real quick. So Jason's going to drop Derrick Henry and make sure that I can pick him up, but he's only going to tell me so I can notice and pick those things up. So that's kind of why they have stuff like that in place, and they're not helping their buddies out with things like that. Not that that would ever happen, but it certainly could. I think that we could talk about Tavon Austin real quick. It's something that I wouldn't call it a must by any stretch, but I do think he helps the return game potentially, and maybe somebody that could potentially step into that Tyler Ervin role. Because Tyler Ervin, again, another point brought up by Mark Eckel, was Irvin's one of those guys that you don't realize how important he is until he's not there, because the Packers they just don't have a ton of guys like him to fill that role throughout the course of the game. So that's something to keep an eye on with Tavon Austin. I would like him to come in and, if nothing else, just be the kick and the punt returner and let Tyler Ervin focus on his role on the offense. Not because of anything Tyler Ervin's done wrong per se, but just to keep him fresh for the offensive side of the ball, just because I think he's more valuable there than he is on the special team side of things. And with all due respect to Darius Shepard, he's been a great story. You can't be a fringe player like you are and turn the ball over. And, each of the last 2 years, he's had some huge turnovers in some big spots. And ultimately, that's where great stories like that go to die, unfortunately. So that's my thought on Tavon Austin. Let's go to that. Jason, I'll give you that real quick before we get into Kenny Stills. But what's your thoughts on Tavon Austin and potentially bringing him in to Green Bay? And could he have an impact outside of just the special team side of things?
Well, him being out of football makes me wonder what's going on, because I was looking at some tape on him like earlier in his career. You could do a lot worse. He's very dynamic and he's got some speed. I don't know how much of it he still has, but I wouldn't hate it at all. I mean, you obviously have an opportunity. And the thing about Darius Shepard too is that not every guy is meant to play in the NFL and play on under the big lights, but maybe Darius Shepard's a very valuable guy to have on the practice squad. So, there's a small percentage of guys that actually play professional sports, and maybe Darius Shepard's ceiling has been realized, and it's like, okay, but you can still put him back on the practice squad. I'm not saying, send the guy out of town. You have an opportunity to upgrade there, and I think the Packers need to do it because this is a good team, and they've got a lot in front of them. It's as we stand right now, we were talking before we started recording about the rest of the schedule and how they could get to where they're going, and as far as getting back to 1 seed or having a favorable matchup in the playoffs. So I don't want to see some of the warts that have hurt this team show up in a critical moment. And I think this kind of things, that the kind of mistakes that Darius Shepard made are something that would be very hard for me to process if it happened during the playoffs. So I think the Packers are wise to do their due diligence here. As far as Kenny Stills goes, he's got to clear waivers. And so there's a lot to happen before they can even take a look at that situation. Draft Hobbyist asks about the contract coming with him. If the Packers claim him, I think it would just be the remaining time on this year's contract. So then I don't know, Jake, if you have the number. I mean, I think it's what?
It's about $2 million. It's about $2 million for what would be a 4 to 5 game season.
Yeah. And that's for that many games is still kind of steep, but he's also a very talented player.
Yeah. As far as Stills goes, my thought on speed on offense is there's no such thing as too much. It's very similar to my opinion of pass rushers on defense. Will he make more of an impact than Marquez Valdes-Scantling? I don't know. I mean, I think that having 2 guys that can do something like that certainly isn't a bad thing to have. Kenny Stills is a veteran. He's been through it in this league. And the Packers right now, I mean, if you look at receivers on this list, you could say guys that you feel pretty good about or guys that you trust. You say Devontae Adams, Alan Lazard, and Marquez Valdes-Scantling. I think you could say you feel pretty good as a possibility to pop one in a big game for a deep ball down the field. Now, I know some people are still going to fixate on the fumble last week, and you certainly have your right to do that. Me personally, that's the first time Marquez Valdes-Scantling's ever lost a fumble in his career. I still trust him as somebody to run the 9 and potentially make a play on things like that. But having somebody else that could do that, because MVS is questionable for tomorrow, and that's a sneaky big part of this offense just because he has the ability to take the top off the defense and allows or keeps teams from squeezing the field. And just the ability to draw that attention. And you look at it, I mean, last week he only had 50 plus yards receiving, but he had a 51-yard pass interference penalty that set up a touchdown. Obviously the deep ball at the end of regulation gave the Packers an opportunity to tie that game. And eventually they honestly should have won the game on that series, but they didn't. And then they went into overtime, and we all know what happened from there. It was just and I actually kind of agree with this to some degree too. It was a good play by the defender. He got a piece of the ball and kind of hit him in a perfect spot. Sometimes that happens too. And that's something that I think that we take for granted so often while we're watching these games is the Packers aren't the only team that's paid to play professional football when we're watching these games. It's the other side of the ball is also paid to play professional football. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but at the same time, I think we forget about that. Sometimes the other team just makes a play, and ultimately that's what has happened. So when it comes to Stills, I think you can put in a waiver claim and be fine. I think I would do that rather than, run the risk of him hitting free agency and deciding he wants to play with warm weather or something like that, kind of take out the margin for error, if you will. But if they don't, I don't think it's one of those, like, this is an easy slam dunk kind of move to where, if the Giants release Dalvin Tomlinson tomorrow, that's an easy move. That's an easy one. Make the claim, everything like that. Get him in here to play on the defensive line next to Kenny Clark. Kenny Stills isn't a player like that. And I know there's a faction of analytics pack, basically the entire group of Acme Packing Company that really likes Kenny Stills. And that's fine. They're certainly entitled to that opinion. Me, I think he's a slightly upgraded version of MVS. Is that worth $2 million for the last 4 games of the season? I mean, it's not my money, so I would say go ahead and spend it. But I'm also not Brian Gutekunst. I'm not Russ Ball, and they have an understanding of that. The question that Aaron brings up is, would you rather have Kenny Stills with that contract or Tavon Austin? I think is going to be a vet minimum type situation. So that's something that's not going to cost the Packers anything. I think there's a possibility they could bring in both guys because they'll do different things. If they bring in Tavon Austin, think of him. Do you guys remember when Denard Robinson played for the Jacksonville Jaguars and they had that OW was his position offensive?
Oh, yeah.
Which was like the dumbest thing ever, but they did it. That's kind of the designation I would put Tyler Ervin and Tavon Austin under. Is they're not receivers, they're not running backs, they're offensive weapons. They just line up wherever on your formation. They can return punts, they can return kickoffs, those kinds of things. While we're at it, if you guys want, go ahead, sign Denard Robinson. I would love it.
But if you have a coach that's willing to use players to their strengths, Matt LaFleur being that, why not add as much talent as you can here to the offense? The one thing I'd say counter to that is that, not that it's a bad idea, but anytime you add a new person to your team and your offense, yeah, they're professionals, and Aaron Rodgers is a future Hall of Famer, and he can still find an open Tavon Austin, even though they've never practiced much together before. But you are playing next to guys you haven't played with before, and formations and snap counts and all that other kind of stuff. And there's little nuances there that you just have to be aware of. Now, the Packers obviously are not worried as much about that. They're like, hey, we've got a chance to upgrade the wide receiver core here. You got Darius Shepard. Okay, you've got Malik Taylor, who hasn't really played a whole lot, right? Even though he's been good at times. So the Packers clearly see an opportunity. I mean, there would be the two spots right there, Jake, to your point, that you could potentially fill with those other two vets.
And I will say this about Kenny Stills, and this is something that Morley again brought up last week on the roundtable, was when Marquez Valdes-Scantling is on the field, you have to account for him because of his deep speed. When Malik Taylor's on the field, nobody's asking where's number 86. When Kenny Stills is on the field, they're asking where's number 10 or whatever number it is that they would give him when he was in Green Bay. That's a small on the margins kind of upgrade you can give to the offense that I think that could be a potential upgrade on that. And I think that that's something you could do. Because, I mean, you've seen it too. The punt returner and the kickoff returner is a position I think that we kind of take for granted until it bites you in the ass, right? Because 2012, I remember very vividly on this show with Marcus Eversole. So this is before it was Jason. This is Throwback Thursday, although it's Saturday. I was advocating for Jeremy Ross to be the punt returner in a playoff game against the 49ers. And my response essentially was, he's a punt returner. What's the worst that could happen? Well, the answer was it was 14-7, and he fumbled a freaking punt when the Packers had a chance to go up 21-7 against a quarterback whose passing ability at the time was a relative unknown. Taking the 49ers and giving them a 2-score deficit changes that entire game. Instead, a few plays later, it's 14-14. And you can see now it's one of those things without Tyler Ervin, the Packers have struggled both in the ability to get a decent return going and Darius Shepard to hold on to the football. It's a small thing that you don't think about until you need to. And I think the Packers should certainly be looking at something like that, because the last thing you want when you have someone like Aaron Rodgers on your team, you don't want something as simple as catching a punt to be the reason. The Ty Montgomery game in LA is a perfect example. Take a knee, let 12 have a chance to go win the game. Instead, he doesn't do that and tries to make a play, and he fumbles, and the game is over. And the Packers instead of having the ball in their best player's hands, it's the equivalent of in basketball. If you were on the Bulls, Steve Kerr, instead of getting a rebound, Steve Kerr getting a rebound is not a great example. Horace Grant getting a rebound, he's trying to not only get the rebound, but sprint up the court and shoot a game-winning 3. Well, not quite what we want you to do, Horace. We want you to get the rebound and get the ball to Michael Jordan. And that's the Packers' job when it comes to their returners. Get the ball to our version of Michael Jordan, which is one Aaron Rodgers. There's a game tomorrow. I'm sure you've heard at this point. We've talked a little bit about some of the stuff on the Bears side of things. Let's talk about the Packers. And I did mention that Marquez Valdes-Scantling is questionable. And there'll be some smart asses on Twitter that have a few things to say, and that's fine. Is Desmond Howard available? I wish. I will say, I wish. Desmond Howard is
25 years ago, I wish, yeah.
Yeah, vivid part of some of my first football memories is Desmond Howard taking the ball to the house. And here's a point that our guy brings up here. MVS is questionable, but this is a good point here that he's bringing up, is if no Hicks, we need to run up the gut. Jason, I'm going to ask you, how many 100-yard rushing games do you think Aaron Jones has this season?
Ooh, One?
One.
Yeah, I was going to say it's like one.
Week 2 against Detroit. He has one 100-yard rushing game. How many games do you think he has with 100 total yards rushing and receiving?
Ooh, both. 3.
It's 2. Obviously, week 2 against Detroit, and then there was one other, and I don't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but I looked at that early this week because I was wondering, it seems like it's been a while since we've had a big Aaron Jones game, and it has. And that is something that, again, for everybody to say, like, Aaron Jones, always the straw that stirs the drink. He's a special running back, blah, 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 blah. Sorry, guys. I agree that he's a special player. I don't agree that the Packers need to re-sign him. I think they need to find a way to sign him if it makes sense for them. But the Packers have basically gone through this season with Aaron Jones essentially being not a non-factor, but he hasn't been an all-pro player. He hasn't been a Pro Bowl player. He hasn't been anything like that. He's got a nose for the end zone, and he's really good at that. And he does a lot of good things in Matt LaFleur's offense. He's a very good player. So don't let that get lost in what I'm saying here. But what I am saying is that, just for example's sake, Aaron Jones has 2 games with 100 all-purpose yards. Jamal Williams has 2 starts. Both of them, he had over 100 all-purpose yards. And this isn't me advocating necessarily for Jamal Williams either. I'm just pointing out what are facts. I mean, those are just what the numbers are. So I think that, first of all, Jason, what's going through your head as I'm spitting out all these numbers? Let's kind of talk through this a little bit.
Yeah, Aaron Jones needs to have a big game. He set a very high bar for himself last season, and that wasn't what I expected him to do this season. But he hasn't, they've rotated, and he hasn't really been able to go off. And I don't know if that has as much to do about what's different up front. I mean, it's largely similar offensive line. You've had some injuries there. Bakhtiari missed a couple games. Did that have an impact to it? Is Aaron Jones dealing with any sort of, ailment or a ding here and there, or, whatever it be? So those are the questions I'm asking, but he's due. He's definitely due for a big game. And I think it was in 2016, Ty Montgomery had a huge breakout game against the Bears. There's something about playing the Bears that brings out the best in certain Packers players. And I think Aaron Jones is prime to be one of those. And yeah, good point. If Hicks isn't playing up front, the Packers need to establish that run, but you've got to get the ball. As great as Jamal Williams has played, and he's been very effective lately, you've got to get the ball in your dynamic playmaker's hands. And that's Aaron Jones. He needs to touch the ball more for sure.
And just for numbers' sake, Aaron Jones had 5 100-yard rushing games alone last season. And I was unable to get that quickly all of the math as far as all-purpose 100-yard total games. Now, some of it obviously was that the Packers last week, when you run 6, I almost said the F word. when you run 6 plays in the third quarter, it's just an anomaly. It's a weird game because somebody's asking, well, why did he only get 10 carries last week? Why didn't they run the ball more? Again, when you only run 6 plays in the third quarter, there's not a whole lot of anything to be doing on offense. It's just hard to establish any kind of rhythm. They ran, I think, 15 plays total before that final desperation drive, which is obviously going to be pass. And if the Packers are going to be pass, Jamal Williams is still the preferred player in the passing game. And you've seen that from Mike McCarthy's regime over to Matt LaFleur's regime. When the Packers are in their 2-minute offense, it's Jamal Williams because of his pass protection, and he's just overall a better player in the passing game. That being said, I would like to see the Packers establish a little bit more of a rhythm on offense and get the ball in the hand. Aaron Jones is still your second best playmaker on offense after Devontae Adams. So I think there's a lot of different reasons that could be the case. Obviously, Jones has struggled a little bit with some injury. Well, with one injury in particular. He missed a couple games in the middle of the season, missed the game against Houston, missed the Win Bowl against Minnesota. But even early in the season, you're looking at the first game of the season, 16 carries, 66 yards, not much doing against Minnesota. They were kind of stacking the box. Aaron Rodgers has a big day, obviously. Detroit, 18 carries, 168 yards, has the 78-yard bomb, has over 200 yards all-purpose because he had 8 catches for 68 yards in that game as well. New Orleans, 16 carries, 69 yards, which was a very nice game. Atlanta, 15 carries, 71 yards, 40 yards receiving. So there's his other 100-yard game that I was talking about. The Tampa Bay game was a bit of a disaster, and that was the whole offense. This isn't blaming Aaron Jones specifically. The whole offense, 10 carries, 15 yards. San Francisco, he had 15 carries. That was his first game back for 58 yards. 13 carries, 46 yards. In Indianapolis, 10 carries, 40 yards. And like I said, I think they would have gotten more carries to him last week had they been able to establish a rhythm on the offensive side of the ball. Unfortunately, they weren't able to do that because, like I said, they had 6 plays in the third quarter. That's just not going to be an easy thing to establish any kind of rhythm on offense. But that's the Aaron Jones side of this story. I would like to see him kind of become a focal point to this offense because this Packers offense does run very well when he's the guy. And overall, I think, it's
just
sometimes
a little bit.
Offense doesn't have to be hard, guys. It really doesn't. Who are your best players? 17, 33. Figure out ways to get the ball in the hands of those guys. Matt LaFleur has been as good at that as anybody has. They just haven't been able to do it the last couple of weeks for various different reasons. I think this is a really good week to do it. I think they have some matchups to do it. I know the Bears have some good linebackers. Obviously, Roquan Smith is one of the best players at his position. Danny Trevathan, Packers fan favorite, is somebody that I think they can make some plays against. And I think Jones is somebody, if they can figure out a way to get him matched up one-on-one against him, they can find ways to get rolling against him. And then obviously in the secondary, Kyle Fuller, Jalen Johnson. Who is this guy? This dude.
I don't know.
Come on, man. You came to a Packers show and you're talking about the Bears. Come on, man.
Of course.
Jalen Johnson, Kyle Fuller, doesn't matter. I don't think they can't guard Devontae Adams, but the MBS injury is a little big one. Like I mentioned, it's a small one because the Packers can win without Marquez Valdez-Scantling, but it does make things a little bit easier on the Bears safety tandem of Eddie Jackson and Deshaun Gibson. And that's not Clinton Dix back there anymore. So unfortunately, the Packers aren't going to be able to hit a deep ball over the top of his head. Clinton Dix, still a little surprising to me. I know we've made a lot of jokes at his expense the last couple of years, but it is a little surprising to me that he's not in the NFL just because name brand, first round pick, was at Alabama. Just, it seems like somebody that could at least be on a practice squad. Maybe he doesn't want to play. I don't know. I don't pretend to know, but it seems like something that he should be able to be on an NFL roster at least, but he's not. But without MVS, the Packers' ability to stretch the field now is at least taken aback. So who's somebody on this roster, Jason, that you think could step in for MVS tomorrow, should he not be able to go or be limited as somebody that's going to be running those deep routes and maybe run the shot play, so to speak?
You got me. I don't know. I mean, it's not going to be Tyler Ervin, right? He's got he could, if he's going to play, he can do that. I mean, I guess you send EQ and hope that, I mean, you don't have anybody as fast as MVS, and that's the whole point of running the shot play. I mean, Jordy was fast, right? You got to have that speed. I guess you could try EQ. Lazard doesn't have the speed. And I think he's trying to work his way back after being gone for so many weeks. So that's why I think Aaron Jones is important, because if he's productive and the Bears can't find a solution for him, which Chicago's defense is pretty good, I'm sure they'll figure something out. But if they can't find a solution for him, then you don't have to worry about throwing it deep. You just get the ball in Aaron Jones's hands in space and just let him work. And maybe Tyler Ervin's a part of that equation as well. And if you run the ball effectively and all the things that offenses want to do, then you don't necessarily have to worry about taking that deep shot, because without Valdez-Scantling, like you said, there can't be too much speed on a roster. The Packers don't really have anybody that comes to mind from an obvious standpoint. Tanya doesn't have the speed. Could Sternberger? I mean, that'd be more of a seam route, but could Sternberger get down the field at this point? I'm just kind of grasping at straws, I guess. It's a good point.
Yeah, I think the answer, there's not a lot of great answers. It's probably EQ. He's a 4.48 40 at the combine, which is a full 10th of a second slower than what MVS ran. And this is another thing, back to the point of Kenny Stills. If MVS can't go for an extended period of time, that makes that potential acquisition perhaps even more pivotal, just because, again, we're going through these options and not a lot of them are great. Now, granted, a lot of teams, it's not like a lot of teams look and say, hey, we lost our main deep threat. It's like the year that the Packers lost Jordy Nelson. They didn't have anybody. Well, Jordy was different from the standpoint of he was like a deep threat, but he was also like a wide receiver one. But so, for example, the Eagles lose Deshaun Jackson. It's not like they just plug somebody in there and replace that. The Eagles, for example, their offense has been trying to replace what Torrey Smith did for them consistently since that Super Bowl season. A lot of people wonder. Now, granted, Carson Wentz is broken, and we'll talk about him more next week, but part of the reason the Eagles offense was as successful as it was the season they won the Super Bowl is because Torrey Smith had that downfield vertical threat for them. And the Eagles haven't had somebody like that since then because Deshaun Jackson has either been injured or unable to be consistent enough to do something like that. That's part of the reason they drafted Jalen Reagor. That's why they drafted John Hightower. It's just something that hasn't paid dividends for that this year. The Packers, that's what MVS is to them. And they don't have another guy, if you will, to do something like that. Now, they could still get plays down the field. I mean, they've hit deep shots to other guys. They hit a deep shot to Alan Lazard against the New Orleans Saints that comes to mind, for example. But Andrea Bruckmeyer brings up the point, since we're talking about EQ, it would be nice to see him step up and improve his game. I agree, because I think from a talent standpoint, and we've talked about this before, from a talent standpoint, I think he's the second most talented receiver on this roster. Now, that hasn't played out on the field, and that's why he's wide receiver 4 at the very best right now. But he's somebody who has an opportunity in front of him. If MVS can't play, then EQ has to kind of make his name a little bit on, even if it's just as a big slot type or doing some stuff on the outside. But I would like to see him. And he had a few things last week. He had that wide receiver screen last week that he almost scored on where he leaped over a couple guys. It was dangerously close. Well, I say dangerously like it was a bad thing, but it was really close to being a touchdown, which would have been incredible. The Packers, they haven't been able to get those guys consistently enough. When you're a 5th or a 6th round pick like that, typically there's a reason, and that overall inconsistency is continuing to show up for EQ, but he has an opportunity in front of him tomorrow. Ultimately, we've talked about paths to victory. And to me, Chicago's path to victory is 2015 Thanksgiving Day. For those of you guys that don't remember that, that was at Lambeau Field. The Packers retired Brett Favre's number that night, and the Packers scored 13 points. Their offense was pathetic. They dropped a couple passes. I think Eddie Lacy had a fumble, if memory serves. The Green 18 OF is a famous little meme type thing that's come from that. That happened that night. It was just one cluster bang of disaster on offense. And to me, that is what I think the Bears' path to victory is, because for all the flack that Mike Pettin has taken this week, for all the flack the Packers defense has taken this week, last week, granted, I feel like I'm kind of grading them on a curve because it's like I'm saying for what I'm used to, it's not that bad, but it wasn't awful. And I think that it wasn't terrible considering the fact that the Packers turned the ball over 4 times and put them in some terrible positions. But they do, and they have found ways to collapse consistently throughout the season. That being said, the Bears offense is terrible. Like, it's awful. They didn't score do you know how hard it is to not score an offensive touchdown in today's NFL? People fall down in the end zone by accident. The New York Jets score a touchdown every week. The Jets. Mm-hmm. It is hard not to score. And last Monday, or 2 Mondays ago now, I guess, they didn't score a single touchdown. The only touchdown they scored was on a Cordero Patterson kickoff return against a Vikings defense, which nobody's going to confuse for the Purple People Eaters. It's not a good defense. It's an okay one that's getting a little bit better with Mike Zimmer. Maybe they can break off a run or two with Trubisky. David Montgomery, I think is better than what he has shown. Allen Robinson obviously is very good, but they suck. I mean, their offensive line is terrible.
Yep. And
it doesn't matter if Charles Leno their starting offensive line is bad. And they're going on some backups now. They've got some guys on injured reserve. They got some guys on the reserve COVID list. They've got a bunch of different moving parts to the point where, like I mentioned earlier in the show, Jason Spriggs might be their left tackle, guys. That is not good.
It's the most excited I've been to hear Jason Spriggs might start a game, I think, since he came into the league.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen the Jason Spriggs experience. several times. And what does Jason Spriggs struggle with? Power and inside moves. What are Zadarius Smith and Rashawn Gary's best attributes? Power and inside moves. I wish you the best of luck if that is in fact the case. This is a game that I think Kenny Clark can dominate. I think that the edge rushers, I am predicting Preston Smith is going to have a sack in this game. I think that he has an opportunity against a bad offensive line. He kind of got called out by his position coach this week saying he needs to have more power and less finesse. And finesse is kind of a dirty word when you're a power rusher. I think that the Packers have an opportunity to just wreck this game on the line of scrimmage. So when I'm saying what's the path to victory for the Bears, what was the way I worded it before the show, Jason? It would be for the Packers to continuously piss down their leg or something like that.
Piss themselves.
Yeah. That's honestly what I think. And I don't mean that to be disrespectful to the Bears, because obviously their defense is very good and very capable. Ultimately, at some point in this league, in this climate, in this season, offense wins out. And you're going to see it this season. We talk about it all the time. Defense wins championships. That's not true anymore. And that's especially not true in 2020. You have to be able to score. Good point here by Bernard Nixon, too. 165 yards for Aaron Rodgers to get to 50,000 yards tomorrow. How fitting it's going to be against the Bears. He needs 7 touchdown passes to get to 400, which I would say seems, I beg to differ. Happy Gilmore accomplished that feat no more than an hour
ago. Right.
So he did it in a half. He did 6.5 once. So maybe he could do 7 in a game. I don't know. But this Bears defense is good enough to slow down the Packers. But ultimately, like I've mentioned, offense wins out, and the Packers have a much better offense than Chicago's. Even if they just have to, even if the Bears take everything away and are just like, okay, it's going to come down to studs against studs. Well, 12, 17, and 33 against whoever Chicago has on that side of the ball. Unless Khalil Mack is just able to completely destroy the game against Billy Turner, I don't see a path to victory for Chicago other than muddying and yucking up this game completely. And the wind is howling and snow is falling, and it's the fog bowl mixed with the snow bowl and the ice bowl matched up to everything else. So that's my thought on path to victory for Chicago. Jason, what are yours?
I mean, the Packers give up a kick return and a punt return for a touchdown. Special teams completely, blows it.
That is one thing that is concerning, because the Packers special teams is not very good. And this Bears team is every Bears team from my lifetime. Really good defense, really good special teams with a really dangerous returner.
Well, and special teams has been a problem for this squad all season long. So that is, as much as it sounds like a funny answer, that's actually is my answer. I think the defense has a chance to keep an offense at bay here. Now, don't let Allen Robinson go off. He's a very good receiver, but you got Jair, you got Kevin King, you got your preferred guys back there. Speaking of great plays by defensive backs, Raven Green also had a punch it out fumble caused last week. So you got him back there. Like, there's just, I don't think the defense, as rough as they've been at times, is going to be put in a situation where they're going to get snake bit by playing off against, and I don't want them to do it, but a decision like that would be less prohibitive than if the special teams completely fell apart. J.K. Scott is, for whatever reason, just not kicked very well. The one good bright spot for special teams is that Mason Crosby's had an incredible season, and he's making everything he's kicking so far. So if he wants to put up not that you ever want to see this again, but if he wants to put up another game like you saw in Detroit on your bachelor party weekend, and couple that with 2 kickoff returns, given up, or a punt return given up, and another block kick, I don't really see how the Packers should drop this game. It could happen, but I just don't see it any other way.
And that's where we're getting into prediction time here. I'm going to take the Packers. I think that, like I said, their offense is better. It's Green Bay. It's at home. It's against the Bears. The Packers are 40 in my lifetime. The Packers we're going to skip the first year, 1991. So since 1992, so my first full season as a living, breathing human, the Packers are 42-15 against Chicago Bears, including the playoffs. It's pure ownership of this franchise. And I've gotten some heat this week because I said that the best rivalry in the NFL is playing this week. And I said it was the Ravens and the Steelers. And somebody said, how can you not say it's the Bears and the Packers? Well, here's why. It's not a rivalry if the other team doesn't win. So not only are the Packers 42-15 since 1992, they've won 15 of the last 20. And that includes a game that Brett Hundley started and finished at Soldier Field. This Bears team is spiraling in the other direction. Matt Nagy is an arrogant son of a gun. He'll find a way to be the smartest guy in the room. Noted offensive genius, Joe, if you're still here. Matt Nagy. Against Matt LaFleur is a coaching mismatch, I think. Aaron Rodgers against the Bears is a mismatch. They could spot him a 20-point lead, as the picture behind Jason's head will show you. Spot him a 20-point lead. It don't matter. The Packers will come back and win the game because they always have. And when in doubt, maybe it's not Randall Cobb. This time it'll be Devontae Adams because Randall Cobb's not here to save the day on something like that. But I think Green Bay wins. I think it's 31-20 over the Bears. I just don't see a way for Chicago, whether it's Trubisky or anything. Maybe they'll have a trick play or something that they'll be able to hit. But I don't see a way that they score enough points. And the Packers, say what you will about their defense. And yes, Mr. Hobbyist, that is why we hate the Vikings more than the Bears, because the Vikings have had more success against the Packers than the Bears, especially in my lifetime. That is true. But I just don't see a way for the Bears to score enough points. And for all the things you say about this Packers defense, and a lot of them are valid, they still have three really good players, in my opinion. Zadarius Smith, Rashawn Gary, Kenny Clark up front, able to wreck the game for Chicago, or wreck the game on the other side of the line of scrimmage for Chicago. Jair Alexander is going to be matched up a lot of the time with Allen Robinson. And it's still Mitchell Trubisky. Like, maybe he'll make a couple plays with his legs. Cool. But overall, I don't see a path to victory for Chicago that doesn't involve Green Bay pissing down their legs. So I'll take, again, Green Bay 31, Chicago 20. Jason, what do you got?
27-20 Packers, and I think the Bears score late, make it look closer than it actually will be. But I don't think the Packers go off and score a bunch of points either. The energy's not been great. Paul Brettel made a good point on our recording of Pack-A-Day this past week. The energy at Lambeau the last couple of games has not been very good for Green Bay. So they need to bring it. They need to bring the energy and find a way to motivate themselves without any fans in the stands. Jake, you mentioned that we might be inching closer. Now the COVID numbers around the United States don't seem to necessarily support that all the time, but maybe inching closer to having fans in the stands, and couldn't happen any quick enough because we're approaching December football and then hopefully playoff football for the Packers. So they got to find a way to bring the energy, but I don't think they, unless that special teams collapse happens. And again, after last week, you'd like to think that they've put some safeguards in place this week. I don't think the Packers drop this one. It's prime time. It's Aaron Rodgers at Lambeau against the Bears. Yeah, he's lost before, but that's the one-off. That's not the norm. The norm is he goes off and does exactly what you see right here.
Correct. And the Packers will have 500 people in the stands tomorrow. It's family and close friends of people that work for the team. So there will be something in the stands. Whether or not they'll have something for the following week against the Eagles, maybe the Panthers game at the end of the month, maybe the Titans game for the home finale, assuming they don't have a home playoff game. Obviously, that all remains to be seen. But that's going to do it for today's show. Be sure to check us out at GameOnWI. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at Jacob Westendorf. You can follow Jason. He's at Jason Perone. Tomorrow is game day, and we have our game day coverage, obviously starting with Game On Fantasy at 10 a.m. We'll have the pre-snap with myself, Alex Struff, and Jimmy Christensen an hour before kickoff, and we'll lead you right up to kickoff. And then after the game, Alex Struff will be taking your calls on the post route about 20 minutes after the game. So hopefully after the Packers get to 8-3, we'll have everything like that. And we'll get a bunch of different stuff. Thank you guys for everybody who hung out in the chat today and was able to ask some questions, talk a little bit. I know we didn't get off to the greatest start, Draft Hobbyist, but I'm kidding, of course. But yeah, I appreciate you stopping in on everything like that. I think that tomorrow should be fun. It's Packers and Bears. It's Sunday Night Football. Mike Tirico and Tony Dungy instead of Al Michaels and Chris Collinsworth. Like you.
Oh, what a treat, Tony Dungy.
What is the deal on that? I guess I've never noticed, but I don't watch a whole lot of like Football Night in America and all that stuff. I know he's a Minnesota guy.
That's okay. I mean, I just don't. He really seems slanted for as much as Joe Buck gets a hard time for being slanted against the Packers. He's not, by the way. Neither is Troy Aikman. Tony Dungy does actually come off that way a little bit too. So he's just not as insightful. We've been treated to some really, really good play calling teams, and Dungy just hasn't really ever been one of those guys.
I guess I've never noticed. I'll have to pay a little bit of attention tomorrow, I guess, during the broadcast. But thank you guys that everybody who came out to this broadcast. Will be back next week for Packers and Eagles. And that should be a lot of fun to preview that one. It's a little bit of a civil war in my house, if you will, although I don't live there anymore, but my pops is an Eagles fan. So I always enjoy those showdowns. In the playoffs, for those that have wondered, we're 1-1 in my lifetime. 4th and 26 obviously happened. The Eagles did not finish the job that season, which I like to point out. And then, of course, 2010, Tramon Williams intercepts Michael Vick in the end zone. And we all know what happened 6 weeks later. Jason, before I hit the outro, one question I did have yesterday when I did the game on Q&A, and we did have some people get some free t-shirts and stuff out of that yesterday. So if you guys have some needs for or desires for some merch, be sure to check that out. Every cent goes back to the website and allows us to make the product better for you. But one of the questions we had asked by our guy, Big B, and I wanted to answer it on here because he's obviously going through way more than a 15-year-old man ever deserves to. So I wanted to answer that on air here. But he asked, what was my favorite Packers and Bears memory? And you're older, so you have a little bit more experience on that, I suppose. So I was wondering, what was yours?
Well, I'm always kind of biased towards the first special moments, like as far as Super Bowls. I'll defer to 96 as meaning more because it was the first time I saw the Packers win a Super Bowl. 2010 had its special moments too. So for me, I got to go back to like one of the first seasons that I really followed the team from start to finish, which was 1989, I guess. The reversal touchdown where Mikowski finds Sterling Sharp in the end zone and the Packers end like an 8-game losing streak against the Bears. The Bears had set the longest winning streak in this whole series history. I think it was 8 straight times. So I had never seen the Packers even beat the Bears in the regular season. And the Bears had just won a championship. Now, to say just one is hilarious because it's like 40 years later. But I would say that between that and sealing the win on their field to go to the Super Bowl, you pick between those two. You got one that's recent and one that goes way back. But the reversal was special just because it was the first time I got to see the Packers beat the Bears, and that had a lot of meaning to it.
The after further review. I've got a few, obviously, winning the NFC Championship at Soldier Field. Obviously, I live in Illinois, hearing all the shit that was talked all week about how we didn't stand a chance because it was a Soldier. And all week I'm having like these nightmares of Green Bay's going on a drive to kind of win the game, and our receiver falls down on that garbage, stupid turf, and it gets returned for a touchdown, which would make perfect sense. And BJ Raji dancing in the end zone after a pick six to a defensive lineman was absolutely incredible. Of course, the game should have been over right at that point. Of course, it wasn't. They made us sweat for it a little bit further, but that was pretty sweet. But overall, it's what's behind Jason's head, because I was running to grab something for my camera guy, and I stopped to watch the play because it was third down, and we were kind of deciding how we wanted to do everything, if whether Chicago won or Green Bay won. And I stopped in the end zone and was like, I'm just going to watch this play. It's third down, and then I'll kind of keep moving if there's a huddle after the play or something like that, just to figure that out. And Cobb caught the ball, and everybody has said this that's been standing around that night. They said it was like the Red Sea parted. And all I remember was saying, Randall, come see me. And he scored. And you
were in the end zone that he was running toward.
Yeah.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. And that is that's the loudest I've ever heard Lambeau. There's a few other examples that come to mind as far as games that got pretty loud and pretty rowdy. The Seattle game in 2015, for example, comes to mind. But that Chicago game that night, all the stuff that surrounded that. Obviously, Rodgers left the game on a cart, came back out. The crowd went wild when he came out of the tunnel and ran to the sideline, the 20-0 comeback, all that stuff to culminate with it's Randall Cobb again. And it was Randall Cobb again. So that was a lot of fun. I appreciated every bit of that. I think
there is a great video of Randall Cobb again on YouTube. Just Google it. It's a Bears fan who's really frustrated.
His name is Will Ingalls.
Will, that's what you get for not coming on the show, man.
Well, I promised Will that he said if he donated to the Jamal charity that I could only do that twice a year. So he did donate to Jamal's charity. So kudos. And if you guys want to do that at Jamal Williams, J Swagbag giveaway on GoFundMe, search Jamal Williams. But I said, I would only make that joke twice a year. And it was every week that the Bears played the Packers. So yeah, that's Will Ingalls in that video for those of you that weren't aware. But We ran out of time, but I want to do that. Get well to our guy, Big B. Obviously, if you guys, I'll leave it to him to share details if he wants to do that. You guys are welcome. Follow him on his Twitter page and everything of that sort. But wanted to answer that question live on air for you guys too. So thanks for listening this week, and we'll see you guys next week.